What if the extraordinary was just, well, ordinary? Imagine waking up and seeing your deceased aunt knitting in her favorite chair, not as some kind of ghost, but simply there, part of the household, completely mundane. Or maybe, what if your deepest emotions literally changed the temperature of a room, or infused themselves into the food you cooked, actually affecting everyone who ate it? Now, you might think this sounds like a straight-up fantasy novel, or perhaps a really wild dream. But what we're diving into today is something far more subtle. We're deeply rooted in our shared reality. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on an exploration into magical realism. It's a captivating literary genre, one that really challenges our very perception of reality. It's not about escaping to other worlds, encountering elves and dragons. Instead, it's about revealing the magic that's already inherent in our own world.
Exactly. It's finding the fantastic in the familiar.
So our mission for this deep dive is to truly unpack this unique genre. We're going to explore its surprising origins, trace its global reach.
Yeah, it's gone everywhere.
Understand its defining characteristics, and maybe most importantly, uncover why it matters so much, particularly for understanding complex social and political landscapes, and maybe giving voice to underrepresented experiences.
Absolutely crucial points.
We'll try to pinpoint exactly how it's defined, how it definitely differs from genres it's often confused with.
Which happens a lot.
Right. And we'll highlight some incredible works and authors you absolutely need to know to sort of experience its power firsthand. And to bring you this comprehensive understanding, we've gathered insights from a truly diverse array of sources. We've got curated library lists focusing on African and Asian magical realism.
Some fascinating stuff there.
Interesting online discussions from avid readers on places like Reddit, and also in-depth academic articles, literary analyses from experts writing for platforms like Rock and Art, Number Analytics, and even Wikipedia. We've really pulled from all corners.
A good mix.
So get ready to rethink what you thought you knew about reality and storytelling. Okay, let's unpack this, because there's definitely more to this magic than meets the eye. All right. Defining the undefinable. What is magical realism? So when we mention magical realism, I'd bet many of you immediately think of traditional fantasy, or maybe urban fantasy.
That's usually the first comparison, yeah.
It seems to be a really common point of confusion, even among people who read a lot. We saw this in one of our Reddit sources, where people were genuinely trying to figure out, what really counts. So for those of us trying to wrap our heads around it, how do we even begin to define it? What exactly sets it apart from, say, a Harry Potter novel or something like that?
That's a great starting point, because you're right, it gets miscategorized all the time. And what's truly fascinating here is how distinct magical realism actually is, despite that common overlap people perceive. At its core, it's a style of literature that essentially shows our real world, the world we live in, as having a subtle, almost natural undercurrent of magic or fantasy.
Okay, so our world is key.
Absolutely crucial. Here's the big distinction from traditional fantasy. While fantasy often builds entirely separate secondary worlds, think elaborate settings, detailed maps, their own histories.
Right, like Middle-earth or Narnia.
Exactly. And they often have their own elaborate, detailed sets of rules for magic. Think of how intricate Brandon Sanderson's magic systems are. They function almost like science within that world. Magical realism explicitly takes place right here, in this world that's familiar to the reader.
Okay.
The fantastical elements aren't some grand, universe-altering force. They're just seamlessly integrated into everyday life. And importantly, they usually appear without any real explanation or justification. They just are.
No complex backstory for the magic itself.
Generally, no. And what makes it truly unique, as one of our Reddit sources vividly put it, is this idea of magic being mundane.
Yeah.
It's just part of the story, part of the world. And crucially, no one thinks it's weird.
Okay. That acceptance is the thing.
That acceptance is absolutely key. Characters don't usually use magic to achieve goals in the way they might in traditional fantasy. The magic is generally not instrumental, not a tool to solve plot problems.
So it's not like casting a spell to defeat the villain.
Not typically, no. Instead, it's just something that happens. Whether it's a character levitating without thinking about it, or a ghost casually visiting the living. The focus isn't on how the magic works, or even if it can logically work. It's on the very real-world impact and implications of its unexplained presence. It just exists as an unquestioned part of the reality presented in the story.
That no one thinks it's weird aspect is incredibly compelling. It really sets up such a different reading experience, doesn't it?
It really does.
It makes you wonder, how did this unique approach to storytelling even begin? Where did the term come from? And how did it evolve into this rich literary genre we know today? It doesn't seem like something that just suddenly appeared out of nowhere.
You're absolutely right. It wasn't sudden, and its origins are quite surprising, actually. It traces back to a moment in art criticism, not literature initially.
Art. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. The term first appeared as magischer Realismus, magical realism, in 1925. It was coined by the German art critic Franz Roh. He used it to describe a specific painting style called new objectivity, which was itself a reaction against the sort of emotional excesses of expressionism.
Okay, so it's a specific art movement.
Exactly. Roh's intent was to highlight how seemingly normal objects, everyday things, can appear magical, fantastic, even strange when you stop and really look at them in the real world. It was about revealing the uncanny, the mysterious, or the heightened reality inherent in the mundane, in the material object itself.
Finding the magic in the normal.
Precisely, and he carefully differentiated it from surrealism. Surrealism focused more on abstract or psychological realities, the subconscious, dreams.
Like Dali.
Exactly like Dali. Whereas Roh's magic was rooted squarely in the actual, tangible world around us. The object itself held the strangeness.
So how did it jump from painting to writing?
Well, this artistic concept then began to influence writers. People like the Italian author Massimo Bontempelli picked up on magic realism for writing around 1926. He aimed to capture that fantastic, mysterious nature of reality in his prose. But the real pivotal moment for its literary spread was the Spanish translation of Roh's book in 1927.
Into Spanish.
Yes. This brought the term and its artistic ideas directly to Hispanic America, and one of the first writers to truly integrate and use realismo mágico in literature, explicitly applying the term, was the Venezuelan writer Arturo Uslar Pietri in 1948. His focus was on exploring the mystery of human living amongst the reality of life, emphasizing that inherent strangeness within everyday existence that often goes unnoticed.
So it's taking root in Latin America now.
Exactly. And around the very same time, another hugely influential figure, the Cuban writer Alejo Carpentier, developed his own very related concept. He called it lo real maravilloso, which translates roughly to the marvelous real in 1949.
The marvelous real. I like that.
It's evocative, isn't it? Carpentier argued that Latin America itself, with its incredibly rich, complex history, its diverse geography, its deep indigenous myths, all of that made it inherently a place where improbable and marvelous things are made possible.
He felt the place itself was magical.
In a way, yes. He felt that Europe, with its Enlightenment emphasis on strict reason and scientific explanation, had sort of lost this magical vigor. For Carpentier, the marvelous wasn't an escape from reality in Latin America. It was a recognition of its true, wondrous, often contradictory nature. It was just baked into the fabric of the continent.
Okay, so we have Roh's Magischer Realismus and Carpentier's Lo Real Maravilloso. How did we get the English term?
It wasn't until 1955 that the literary critic Angel Flores kind of brought these evolving ideas together. He coined the English term magical realism to specifically describe literature that combined elements of both Roh's magic realism, that uncanny and the mundane, and Carpentier's marvelous realism, that inherent wonder of Latin America.
So Flores synthesized them.
Pretty much. He notably named the Argentine author Jorge Luis Borges as the first true magical realist, particularly for his collection Historia Universal de la Infamia. Although it's also important to acknowledge that some earlier works definitely exhibited these characteristics long before the term was formally coined. Think about Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
Oh, yeah, Gregor Samsa waking up as a giant insect.
Exactly. Published in 1915, decades earlier. And in fact, Gabriel García Márquez, who would become arguably the most famous figure of the genre,
100 Years of Solitude.
the very one. He even cited Kafka's Metamorphosis as a key influence. And significantly, he also credited his grandmother's storytelling style.
His grandmother.
Yes. He recalled her telling him things that sounded supernatural and fantastic, but she told them with complete naturalness, just matter of fact. And he said that was the method he sought to emulate in his own writing.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It shows how the genre really blossomed from various cultural and intellectual seeds, blending art, philosophy, lived experience, and everyday storytelling traditions. It's a rich mix.
That's a fascinating lineage. So moving beyond just the general presence of magic, what are the specific ingredients, the core characteristics that truly make a story magical realism? What should listeners look for if they want to, identify this genre on their own? Because it sounds like it's more than just a vague feeling of magic happening. It seems like a very precise craft.
You're absolutely right. It is precise and quite nuanced, which is probably why it's so often misunderstood or mislabeled. There are several key qualities, characteristics, that consistently appear across magical realist texts. They work together to create that really distinct experience for the reader. The first, and maybe the most fundamental, is a realistic setting.
Okay, grounded in reality.
Absolutely grounded. Magical realism doesn't invent entirely new worlds. It works by revealing the magic that's already embedded in our existing world. Think of Gabriel García Márquez's fictional town of Macondo in 100 Years of Solitude. It feels incredibly real, doesn't it? Grounded in a specific Latin American geography and history, you feel the heat, the dust.
Yeah, definitely.
But within that deeply familiar setting, extraordinary things simply happen. Yellow butterflies constantly following someone, insomnia plagues, people ascending to heaven. And it's all presented as part of the everyday fabric of that place. The sense of place is crucial. It's always our world, but slightly, beautifully, sometimes disturbingly, magically skewed.
Okay, so realistic setting first. What's next?
Building directly on that, the next characteristic is the seamless integration of fantastical elements into the mundane. These are the magical occurrences themselves, and they are woven directly into the fabric of daily life, not set apart as special events.
Like the ant knitting you mentioned earlier.
Exactly like that. Or they can range from more overt supernatural abilities like levitation or telepathy given to characters, which you see in various works. Or they can be deeply personal and visceral, like in Laura Esquivel's Like Water for Chocolate, where Tita's intense emotions are literally infused into her cooking.
Right, making people weep or feel intense passion when they eat her food.
Precisely, causing tangible, often comical or heartbreaking effects. But the key, as we've noted, is that these events are presented as if they are entirely normal within the story's context, utterly unquestioned by the characters. It's not about a character discovering their powers. It's often about them having powers as just another part of their daily routine, like having brown eyes.
So the characters themselves don't even bat an eye. They don't freak out.
Not usually, no, which is such a contrast to traditional fantasy where characters are often shocked or scared or trying to figure out the rules of magic.
That's really interesting.
And that leads us directly to another crucial yet subtle characteristic called authorial reticence.
Authorial reticence, meaning the author holds back.
Exactly. The author deliberately holds back information and explanations about this disconcerting, magically infused world. The narrator maintains an indifferent, almost deadpan tone, presenting fantastical events with a kind of logical precision, as if nothing extraordinary is happening.
Like a news report about something impossible.
Perfect analogy. There's no gasp of surprise from the characters, no scientific inquiry into how the magic works. This means the reader is subtly encouraged to simply accept the marvelous as normal and common, rather than constantly seeking scientific or rational explanations. You're just meant to experience it as part of the reality being presented without needing to understand the how. The author trusts you to just go with it.
Okay, that requires a certain kind of reading,
Yeah.
a willingness to suspend disbelief in a different way.
It does. Another defining trait is hybridity.
Hybridity, like a mix of things.
Yeah. Magical realism often employs multiple, sometimes even clashing planes of reality within the same story. This can manifest as powerful juxtapositions like gritty urban settings and mystical rural landscapes existing as side by side. Or, more profoundly, the clash and blending of Western rational viewpoints and indigenous spiritual worldviews within a single narrative.
So different ways of seeing the world colliding in the story.
Exactly. It creates this rich tapestry of different realities or ways of perceiving reality existing simultaneously. This layering often reflects the complex, often post-colonial or transcultural atmospheres from which much magical realism emerged, where different traditions, histories, and perspectives naturally coexist, sometimes uneasily.
That makes sense.
Then there's a pervasive heightened awareness of mystery. Instead of solving mysteries, magical realist literature tends to amplify them.
So it doesn't wrap everything up neatly.
Quite the opposite. Often, it deliberately leaves elements unexplained or deliberately obfuscates parts of the story. This creates a pervasive sense of confusion and wonder, which paradoxically enhances the sense of reality, making it feel deeper, stranger. The goal isn't necessarily resolution in the conventional sense, but an invitation to the reader to, as one critic put it, let go of pre-existing ties to conventional exposition, linear time structures, and scientific reason. Instead, it encourages us to strive for a state of heightened awareness of life's connectedness or hidden meanings. As another critic, Louis Leal, eloquently put it, it's about learning to seize the mystery that breathes behind things.
Wow. Sees the mystery that breathes behind things.
Mhm.
That's poetic. So it's less about understanding every detail and more about experiencing the world in a different, maybe deeper way.
Precisely. It's a very different kind of engagement than reading a puzzle to be solved, and this ties into the concept of plenitude.
Plenitude, like abundance.
Exactly. This idea, notably articulated by Alejo Carpentier in his discussion of the Baroque style, describes an extraordinary abundance of disorienting detail. It's a dense layering of elements, sensory details, historical references, intertwined events, multiple characters and storylines. It often reflects the complex, maybe overwhelming post-colonial or transcultural atmospheres we mentioned earlier. Carpentier himself saw this plenitude as intrinsic to Latin America, a continent he described as filled with marvels, where diverse influences organically produce this kind of elaborate, rich narrative tapestry.
So the reader might feel a bit overwhelmed by detail sometimes.
They might, but it also creates a deeply immersive, almost dreamlike density. It helps blur the line between the subtle magic and the mundane reality, making the fantastical feel even more natural, as if it's just another rich detail in a vibrant, overflowing world. It's like a feast for the senses that pulls you deeper into its unique logic.
Okay, one last characteristic.
Yes. Finally, we often see metafiction at play.
Metafiction. Like the story commenting on itself.
Exactly. This characteristic draws attention to the reader's role in the story, making them self-conscious of their status as readers. With its multiple realities and blurred lines, magical realism explicitly explores the impact fiction has on reality and vice versa. It's particularly well-suited for drawing attention to social or political critiques. By subtly breaking the fourth wall, perhaps, or reminding you that you're reading a constructed story, it can highlight how our understanding of reality, and thus our social structures, are also constructed.
So it makes you question your own reality, not just the characters.
Precisely. It invites deeper engagement with the underlying messages.
That's a fantastic breakdown of the core elements. It really clarifies how precise and layered this genre is. And it seems like this precision is what allows it to tackle such profound themes. Speaking of which, it's clearly not just about narrative style, is it? It sounds like magical realism has these deep connections to culture, history, even broader media. It's about resonant themes and cultural identity. Can you elaborate on how it extends beyond just the written page?
Absolutely. That's a key part of its significance. If we connect this to the bigger picture, magical realism has had an immense impact beyond just literature. It shaped cultural identity and gained global recognition for diverse voices precisely because its very essence is intertwined with its context.
How so?
Well, a primary function is its reflection of culture and history. Remember, the genre largely emerged in mid-20th century Latin America. This was a period of profound social and political change marked by the legacies of colonialism, frequent political upheaval, dictatorships, revolutions, and the complex blending of indigenous traditions with European influences.
A lot going on.
A huge amount. Authors in the region used magical realism as a powerful lens to explore and redefine national identities. They delved into complex themes like love, family, memory, trauma, and social justice. Crucially, it also allowed them to foreground the region's rich indigenous and African influences, giving voice to traditions and perspectives often marginalized or suppressed by Western rational thought and colonial powers.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Take 100 Years of Solitude again. It's seen as a quintessential Colombian novel. It's not just a family saga. It's often read as a national epic, a metaphor for Colombian history. Think of the banana plantation massacre in the book, or the endless rain that lasts for years in Macondo. These are magical, exaggerated events, but they symbolize real-world historical traumas, economic exploitation, political violence, and the seemingly never-ending cycles of conflict and natural disaster that have affected Colombia and much of Latin America. The magic makes the unbearable reality bearable to write about, perhaps.
Right, or Allende's work.
Exactly. Isabel Allende's The House of the Spirits illuminates Chilean history and culture through generations of women. It shows how personal and national destinies are interwoven, with magical elements like Clara's clairvoyance subtly reflecting the country's own prophetic anxieties and political turmoils leading up to and during the Pinochet regime. The magic isn't separate from the politics. It's part of how the politics are experienced and understood.
So it started strong in Latin America. How did it spread?
From these strong roots, magical realism experienced a significant global spread and influence. Its appeal transcended geographical boundaries. Authors from various continents adopted and adapted its unique narrative style to tell their own stories, blending their specific cultural realities with magical elements. For instance, African magical realism often draws heavily from local folklore, ancient spirits, powerful deities, and animals as guides or spiritual forces. It creates this compelling balance of gritty realism, sometimes depicting harsh post-colonial realities, and profound mysticism rooted in specific traditions.
Like which authors?
Great examples include Ben Okri's The Famished Road. It's a Booker Prize winner, portraying an Abiku or spirit child existing between life and death, navigating the spiritual and physical worlds simultaneously in Nigeria. It's quite disturbing, but incredibly powerful. Or Helen Oyemini's The Icarus Girl, which uses Nigerian mythology to explore themes of identity and belonging through a tale of doppelgangers. And maybe most strikingly in recent years, Akweke Venizi's Freshwater. It's famously narrated by a chorus of Igbo spirits, or Ogbanje, that reside within the protagonist. It offers a deeply psychological and culturally specific exploration of identity, gender, trauma, and mental health through this magical realist lens.
Wow, that sounds intense. What about in Asia?
Moving to Asian magical realism, we often see it characterized by its perhaps more sparing or subtle use of magic and mysticism. It's often used to tell serious stories focusing on family, culture, history, and societal pressures. It frequently serves as an entry point for readers who aren't traditional fantasy fans because the magical elements are integrated so seamlessly. They feel almost like heightened reality or metaphor rather than outright fantasy.
Okay, examples.
Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children is a landmark example. The protagonist, Salim Sinai, is born at the exact moment of India's independence and has telepathic powers linked to other children born at that hour. His life becomes an allegory for India's tumultuous post-colonial history. The magic is inseparable from the political narrative. Then there's Haruki Murakami in Japan. His works, like Kafka on the Shore or The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, blend surreal journeys, talking cats, mysterious wells, and unexplained phenomena with profound self-discovery in contemporary Japan. There's often an underlying critique of modern society's alienation and loss of meaning. Mohsin Hamid's Exit West is a very contemporary example. It uses magical doors that instantly transport people across continents to tell a poignant story about the global refugee crisis, civil war, love, and displacement. The magic makes an incredibly difficult, timely subject remarkably approachable and human.
That sounds powerful.
And Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, set in Kerala, India. It subtly infuses its intricate family saga with dreamlike, almost poetic prose. The magic here is more about atmosphere, memory, trauma, and a heightened, almost visceral reality than overt supernatural events. The narrative structure itself feels magical sometimes.
It really shows the adaptability of the genre.
Absolutely. And this global reach includes other notable global voices as well. People often discuss authors like Toni Morrison in America.
Like Beloved.
Exactly. Beloved is a prime example, often categorized as magical realism, dealing with the haunting legacy of slavery. Though it's worth noting, Morrison herself sometimes contested the label. She argued her work was simply depicting the reality of African-American spiritual beliefs and experiences, not employing a magical technique from outside. But it certainly fits many characteristics.
That's an important distinction from the author herself.
It is. Other names often mentioned include Italo Calvino in Italy, Olga Tokarczuk in Poland, a Nobel laureate, Mo Yan in China, also a Nobel laureate. It truly demonstrates the genre's universal appeal and adaptability across vastly different cultures.
And it's not just books, right? You mentioned its roots in art. Does it show up elsewhere?
Definitely. Magical realism isn't confined solely to the written word. It has a significant influence across other mediums. For instance, in film and television, filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro are masters of this. Think of Pan's Labyrinth, set against the backdrop of Franco's Spain, or The Shape of Water.
Yeah, those blend the gritty reality and the fantastical beautifully.
They really do. And Hayao Miyazaki's animated classics like Spirited Away have that same quality fantastical elements presented matter-of-factly within a recognizable, albeit heightened, world. Other examples might include Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, many of Terry Gilliam's visually imaginative films, even Disney's Encanto with its magical family in a realistic Colombian village setting, or TV series like Reservation Dogs, which brilliantly blends the mundane life on an indigenous reservation with ancestral spirits and mystical occurrences as just part of life.
So it translates well visually.
It seems to. And let's not forget its origin was in visual art. Artists like Frida Kahlo, whose surrealist self-portraits often contain this blending of the deeply personal, the real, and the fantastical. Or George Tooker, whose paintings have this eerie, magical quality within realistic settings. Alongside more contemporary figures, continue to explore its visual possibilities. And even in newer media like video games, some academics argue that games themselves can be intrinsically magical realist. Titles like Kentucky Route Zero, with its strange, dreamlike journey through a secret highway.
I've heard of that one.
Or the Metal Gear franchise, which often blends realistic military espionage fiction with unexplained supernatural elements, ghosts, and psychic powers without much explanation. They create that characteristic sense of the uncanny within a familiar genre, challenging players' perceptions of their virtual reality.
It really is everywhere once you start looking for it.
Its broad influence across mediums truly underscores the genre's pervasive and adaptive power to tell stories.
This whole discussion really opens up the fascinating idea that magical realism isn't just about, beautiful prose or quirky elements. It often seems to carry a much deeper, sometimes provocative message. Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Let's talk about those political undercurrents.
Yep.
What kind of social criticism is being conveyed through this genre, and why is it such an effective tool for that?
You're hitting on a truly crucial point. Many critics argue that magical realism often contains an implicit criticism of society, particularly the elite. It functions as a powerful mode for what are sometimes called eccentrics, that is, people or groups marginalized geographically, socially, economically, to sort of break free from what's often described as the inarguable discourse of privileged centers of literature, the dominant narratives, essentially.
So it gives a voice to the voiceless, in a way.
Exactly. In this sense, magical realist texts can be seen as profoundly subversive texts. They challenge dominant social forces, establish historical narratives, and even the very idea of what constitutes reality for different groups of people whose experiences might not fit neatly into rational Western frameworks.
How does the magic itself help with that?
Well, as Salman Rushdie eloquently argued, it allows political ideas to be expressed in ways that might not be possible through more conventional, realistic literary forms. Especially, he suggested, in societies where, as he put it, impossible things happen constantly and quite plausibly out in the open under the midday sun.
What did he mean by impossible things?
He was likely referring to the real-world chaos, the inexplicable violence, the absurd political decisions, the deep-seated injustices, the stark contradictions that can feel just as fantastical and illogical as any magical event in a story. So the random, surreal, sometimes arbitrary nature of the magic in these stories can directly mirror the chaotic realities of oppression, political instability, and social upheaval that these authors and their characters experience. It's a way of reflecting a reality that itself feels unreal. It's saying, look, our reality is this strange, this unbelievable, and here it is, laid bare in the text.
That makes so much sense. It's almost like the magic is a metaphor, but it's also literally happening within the story's reality.
Precisely. It operates on both levels simultaneously.
But this leads us to a really fascinating, though perhaps contentious, discussion that came up in our sources. It's about who gets to write or even categorize magical realism. Can you tell us more about that who writes magical realism debate?
Yes. This is where the genre gets truly complex and where we see how literary categorization itself isn't neutral. It can have real-world implications. There's one argument, notably put forth by John Evans in an article we looked at, that suggests a kind of divide in how we view different types of fantastical literature. He claimed that what he called systemic fantasy, so conventional fantasy with structured magic systems like Lord of the Rings or the Mistborn series, is primarily written by Western authors from, in his words, peaceful, orderly nations.
Okay.
Magical realism, on the other hand, he argued, is mostly written by people of color who come from troubled, i.e. colonized lands. Evans implies that the genre's random, surreal, and arbitrary nature is a direct reflection of the chaotic and often violent realities these authors experience. He states that for them, the surreal becomes normal and the insane becomes rational because they, quote, live amid papered-over, blood-soaked horror.
That's a pretty strong claim, linking this style directly to trauma and colonization.
It's a very strong claim and a controversial one. This perspective has been sharply critiqued by others as creating a dangerous false dichotomy. Critics argue that this view, whether intentionally or not, can perpetuate certain biases in the literary world and reinforce a kind of Western hegemony.
Oh, so?
Well, the argument is that this view effectively pigeonholes writers from nations with a colonial legacy into a genre deemed inaccessible to the public in Western markets. It essentializes their writing based on their origin.
Right. It suggests only certain people can or should write it, and it's because of their background.
Exactly. And this kind of categorization, critics argue, can create a kind of literary double standard, a form of literary xenophobia, as one source put it. For instance, when authors like Neil Gaiman, who is a white Western man, write works like Anansi Boys or American Gods, which arguably blend the mundane and the divine with little explanation in ways almost indistinguishable from magical realism.
Yeah, American Gods feels very much like that.
Right. Yet, those books are widely categorized and marketed as accessible fantasy. Meanwhile, non-Western authors writing in a very similar vein are often confined to the label of magical realism. And that label, particularly in the West, is sometimes perceived, rightly or wrongly, as niche, snooty, and inaccessibly literary.
So the label itself might limit readership or how the book is perceived.
That's the concern. This kind of rigid genreification, it's argued, can significantly impact the careers, readership, and even perceived literary merit of marginalized writers. It potentially limits their reach and frames their work as other or difficult.
So this isn't just about academic labels. It has real implications for how books are marketed, reviewed, and ultimately read. It's about who gets to be seen as writing accessible stories versus something more niche or literary.
Precisely. That's the heart of the critique. So instead of maintaining these rigid, potentially biased distinctions based on author origin, some propose a different approach. Maybe we should see magical realism simply as surrealist fantasy, or perhaps a particular subgenre of fantasy that focuses on the uncanny integration into the real world. This allows for the acknowledgement that it can be written and enjoyed by just about anyone who has a taste for the uncanny and the weird, regardless of their background. It refocuses the discussion on the literary technique and the reader's experience, rather than the author's origin being the primary determinant of the genre label.
That insight into the impact of literary categorization and potential bias is truly eye-opening. It adds another layer to understanding the genre's reception. And thinking about marginalized voices. This powerful tool for social commentary extends to others too, right? Like how magical realism has been used specifically as a feminist discourse. It feels like a natural fit for that kind of exploration.
It's an absolutely perfect fit, yes. Magical realism's inherent transgressive spirit, its willingness to bend reality and challenge norms, and its ability to deconstruct current ideology make it an incredibly appropriate and powerful mode for feminist writers. It allows them to voice the world, especially women who have historically been silenced or confined under the reign of patriarchal society. Their realities, their stories, their ways of knowing might not always fit within purely rational or male-defined structures.
Especially in certain contexts.
Exactly. In many regions, particularly those sometimes termed third world countries, in the sources we looked at, women have faced and continue to face excruciating struggles. They combat sexism that's deeply intertwined with issues of class, caste, religion, political oppression, and the fundamental fight for basic freedoms. In such contexts, a mystified narrative like magical realism, blending the harsh realities with the fantastical, becomes arguably the most fitting mode of expression for the political realities of these regions. It allows for a symbolic and often very viscerally real subversion of oppressive norms through the narrative itself.
Can you give examples of that feminist use?
Yes, we see this powerfully in works like Isabel Allende's The House of the Spirits, set against the turbulent political backdrop of 20th century Chile, and also in Shornish Parsipur's Tuba and The Meaning of Night, which navigates 20th century Iran. Both novels portray women struggling against deeply oppressive patriarchal systems where, as one critic notes, unlike men, they often have no chance of getting to the higher stages of life. Their pathways to power, agency, or even basic self-determination are frequently blocked in conventional ways.
So how does magic function for these female characters?
Often in these works, magic becomes almost a direct feminine prerogative. It's associated with women's power, intuition, and resistance. In The House of the Spirits, magic is almost exclusively associated with the women of the family. Clara, the clairvoyant protagonist, possesses telekinetic powers, predicts futures, converses with spirits. And interestingly, her abilities actually seem to increase when she embraces her domestic roles as wife and mother rather than diminishing, which subverts the typical patriarchal expectation that domesticity stifles women's power.
Right, the men of the book dismiss it, don't they?
They do. Men like Esteban Truba, who is presented as the embodiment of patriarchy incarnate, as one source calls him, dismiss magic as an exclusively feminine affair. He labels women hysterical for their fantastic abilities, seeing it as a sign of weakness or irrationality. Yet, ironically, the magic still subtly touches and affects him. He experiences a physical shrinking, subtly but powerfully, attributed to his sister Ferula's curse after he banishes her. It's a magical consequence stemming from female power that he cannot escape, despite his denial.
So Allende uses magic to critique patriarchy directly.
Yes, and even while she acknowledges being inspired by García Márquez, she very deliberately regenders writing, magic, and storytelling. She creates this powerful feminine collective voice through characters like Clara and Alba. This voice gradually subdues Esteban Truba's masculine authoritarian tone within the narrative. Through Clara's meticulous notebooks, her granddaughter Alba is able to reconstruct the untold story of women's oppression in Latin America. It's Allende's unique feminist twist, a conscious effort to challenge male-dominated historical narratives and give women agency in telling their own stories, writing their own history.
That's fascinating. And the other example, Parsipur.
Similarly, Shornish Parsipur, a Persian female novelist, draws inspiration directly from Scheherazade of 1001 Nights. She explicitly reclaims a legacy of marvelous reality rooted in Persian literature, but frames it as a female narrative tradition. Her protagonist, Tuba, converses with the spirit of a murdered girl, Satara, whose experiences are portrayed as completely real within the novel. This powerfully signifies marginalized female voices, those that exist but are never seen or heard in conventional society. It gives presence to the silence.
And Parsipur goes further.
Yes, Parsipur creates what one critic calls a male-resistant discourse. Her novel uses the ethereal character of Layla, an archetypal female figure from ancient Sumerian mythology, to guide Tuba on a magical journey to the underworld. This journey symbolizes the liberation of the female self and profoundly questions patriarchal myths and religious structures within Iranian society. This whole process allows women, through magical realism, to potentially reinvent a discourse outside of the specular phallocentric structure, meaning outside of a male-dominated framework of viewing and understanding the world. It offers a path to self-definition and truth beyond patriarchal confines.
Wow. So the way these authors weave magic into the reality of women's lives transforms the fantastical into this incredibly powerful, subversive tool for social and political commentary.
Exactly. It's not just decoration, it's integral to the critique.
Okay, this genre is clearly incredibly rich and multifaceted. It's capable of such deep social and political commentary, doing so much more than just magic happening. But to truly understand it and maybe appreciate its uniqueness, we really need to clarify what it isn't. What are the key distinctions between magical realism and other genres that it often gets confused with, especially given those ongoing debates we've seen about how we categorize these stories?
This raises a really important practical question, and it's precisely where much of the critical debate and general confusion lies. It's about discerning subtle but significant differences that truly define each genre, even if the lines can sometimes seem blurry.
Right, so let's start with the big one, fantasy.
Okay. Magical realism versus traditional fantasy. The primary distinction, as we've touched upon, really comes down to the setting and the nature of the magic. In traditional fantasy, authors generally create entirely different realities with their own set of rules for magic. Think secondary worlds.
Like Sanderson's detailed systems you mentioned.
Exactly. Those systems exist in a world separate from ours, and the magic has specific, often understandable laws that characters learn, exploit, or are bound by. There's often a whole internal logic to it. Magical realism, conversely, does not create a secondary world. Its magic is integrated into our familiar, recognizable world. And crucially, it appears usually with no explanation and is simply accepted as normal by the characters within that world. The casualness, the mundanity with which magic occurs is a hallmark. It's not about grand quests in other realms. It's about the inexplicable happening right here next door, maybe even in your own kitchen.
So those quotes you mentioned earlier, like fantasy written by people who speak Spanish.
Yeah, Gene Wolfe's quip or Terry Pratchett calling it a polite way of saying you write fantasy. Those quotes, while perhaps oversimplified and maybe a bit dismissive,
A bit reductive, yeah.
they do highlight the perceived overlap, but also that strong desire people have for categorization, which can be influenced by factors like author origin or perceived literary merit versus genre fiction. But the core difference remains: separate world with explained or structured rules versus our world with unquestioned, inexplicable magic.
Okay, so if a character's surprised by magic, or if there's a magic school with a rule book, it's probably not magical realism.
That's a pretty good rule of thumb, generally speaking. Now next, let's distinguish it from surrealism.
Right. You mentioned this briefly with Franz Roh.
Yes. While both explore the illogical and challenge conventional reality, surrealism focuses intensely on the imagination and the mind. It aims to express the inner life, psychology, the subconscious, often through dream motifs or deliberate distortions of reality that feel like a waking dream or a hallucination.
Think Dali paintings again, or maybe some surrealist films.
Exactly. Where reality is warped through a subjective, often unsettling psychological lens. Magical realism, however, rarely presents the extraordinary in the form of a dream or a psychological experience. The magic relies on its accepted and unquestioned position in tangible and material reality. It's presented as objectively real within the story's world. It's not about the unconscious mind's workings or a character's subjective distortion. It's about magic being actually real and present in the everyday world, witnessed and accepted by characters within the narrative, even if it defies logic.
So the characters aren't dreaming it, it's just part of their shared waking life.
That's the key difference in presentation.
Okay. What about fabulism? That sounds similar too.
Then there's fabulism, which is a particularly tricky one because there's significant conceptual overlap, and the term itself is used in different ways. Traditionally, fabulism refers to fables, parables, and myth stories with clear morals or allegorical meanings. In contemporary literary use, it often incorporates fantasy elements into a realistic setting, frequently to critique the exterior world allegorically.
So how does it differ from magical realism?
The key difference often cited is that fabulism tends to use specific, recognizable myths, fairy tales, or folk tales as its source material. Think of a modern retelling of a classic Greek myth. While magical realism might draw on folklore more generally, or create its own unique magical elements, it typically uses broader, more general magical occurrences rather than directly incorporating well-known narratives for direct, often moralistic, allegorical interpretations. Fabulism also isn't necessarily tied to a specific culture's reality in the same way magical realism often is. It might focus more on universal human experience through these archetypal stories. Authors like C.S. Lewis, whose Two We Have Faces is a retelling of the Cupid and Psyche myth, or Italo Calvino, known for his fantastical vignettes in works like Our Ancestors, are often cited as fabulous. They're consciously drawing from existing stories or archetypes to make a point.
Whereas magical realism's magic feels more organic to its own unique narrative world.
Often, yes. It feels less like a direct allegory using known symbols and more like an inherent quality of the reality being depicted.
Okay, that helps. One more. Science fiction.
Right. Science fiction. Both genres certainly bend the notion of reality and toy with the human imagination, exploring what's possible or impossible. However, science fiction fundamentally provides, or at least implies, a rational, physical explanation for any unusual occurrences, even if the science is speculative. It's often set in a distinct future or an alternate world, and the realism lies in its possibility based on scientific advancement, extrapolation, or technology.
Like spaceships, AI, genetic engineering.
Exactly. Think of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. The fantastical social structures are given detailed pseudoscientific explanations based on genetic engineering, psychological conditioning, and so on. There's a logic, however flawed or dystopian. Magical realism, in stark contrast, offers no such explanations for its magic. The magic remains unexplained and fully present in a recognizable past or present reality. It doesn't look to science or technology to justify the impossible. It simply presents it as an unquestionable fact within the story's world. There's no complex theory behind why a character can fly or why ghosts walk among the living. They just do.
That clears up a lot of the fog around these similar-sounding genres. It really helps to draw those clear, albeit sometimes fine lines. So wrapping this all up, what does this mean for us, the readers, in terms of how we approach literature, maybe even how we perceive our own world? What's the big takeaway from this deep dive into magical realism?
I think the biggest takeaway is that magical realism is a truly profound and incredibly rich genre that offers immense value, partly because it fundamentally invites us to look differently at the world around us. First, as we've seen, it challenges our conventional understanding of reality by seamlessly, matter-of-factly blending the mundane and the miraculous. This creates a uniquely immersive and thought-provoking reading experience. It encourages us to question our own assumptions about what is possible and what is real, not just in fiction, but potentially in our everyday lives too. It opens up perception.
It makes you look twice at things.
Exactly. Second, it provides a powerful, often critical, cultural, and social lens. As we discussed at length, it offers unique perspectives on history, culture, memory, trauma, and complex societal issues. It's particularly potent when giving voice to marginalized perspectives that are typically underrepresented or silenced in mainstream narratives. It's a way for those voices to tell their truths, even when those truths feel surreal or fantastical to outsiders, making the seemingly impossible a relatable mirror for harsh or complex realities.
A tool for empathy and understanding different realities.
Very much so. Third, it's undeniably a global phenomenon. Despite its strong historical roots in Latin America, it has proven itself constantly evolving and adapting across diverse cultures and art forms worldwide. This demonstrates its universal appeal and perhaps points to a deeply human need to express the inexplicable, the things that defy easy, rational explanation. And finally, for you as a reader, when you pick up a work that might be magical realism, you now have the tools to recognize its distinctive signature. Remember to look for those key characteristics working together: the realistic setting, the matter-of-fact presentation of unexplained magical elements, the subtle hand of authorial reticence, where the author and characters don't comment on the magic's strangeness, and it's often implicit, sometimes explicit, social or political critique. These are the threads that weave together the magic and the real, creating something truly unique and powerful.
Fantastic summary. Now for the really fun part, recommendations.
Yeah.
After this conversation, I'm sure our listeners are eager to dive into this genre themselves. What are some must-read magical realism novels that you suggest for anyone looking to truly experience what we've been talking about today? Where should they start?
Absolutely. For anyone wanting to explore this fascinating genre, here are a few indispensable starting points that perfectly illustrate the characteristics we've discussed. First, you almost have to start with Gabriel García Márquez's 100 Years of Solitude. It's the quintessential work, the one most people think of. It's that sweeping, multi-generational saga that masterfully weaves history, myth, and the bizarre into the fabric of everyday life in Macondo. It's an immersive, sometimes challenging, but ultimately transformative experience that truly embodies the genre's spirit.
The classic cornerstone.
Definitely. Then, equally powerful is Isabel Allende's The House of the Spirits. As we discussed, it's a powerful story intertwining personal and political history in Chile, showcasing how magic can be a profound tool for feminist discourse and cultural commentary through generations of strong women. It's epic and moving.
Okay, 2 Latin American titans. What about going global?
For a taste of its global spread, absolutely pick up Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, an iconic Booker Prize-winning novel where Salim Sinai's telepathic powers are inextricably linked to India's tumultuous independence and partition. It's a rich, complex tapestry of history, politics, and fantasy, a demanding but incredibly rewarding read. For a distinct taste of Asian magical realism, you can't go wrong with Haruki Murakami. Maybe start with Kafka on the Shore or the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. His works are reflective, melancholic, and deeply surreal, depicting ordinary characters navigating bizarre and mystical events in contemporary Japan, often with talking cats, strange wells, and a dreamlike atmosphere.
Murakami's very popular. Good entry point, maybe?
He can be, yes. For something truly unique and maybe more intense from African magical realism, check out Akwaeke Emezi's Freshwater. As mentioned, it's narrated by a chorus of Igbo spirits, Ogumnje, controlling the protagonist's mind and body. It's deeply rooted in Nigerian mythology and offers a haunting, profoundly intimate exploration of identity, gender, and mental health. It's unforgettable.
That sounds incredibly powerful. Any contemporary recommendations?
For a more contemporary take that deals with very current issues, Mohsin Hamid's Exit West is excellent. It uses those magical doors that appear suddenly around the world to explore the urgent and bittersweet story of love, displacement, and the global refugee crisis during a civil war. The magic makes incredibly difficult, timely subjects remarkably approachable and deeply human. If you're looking for something perhaps a bit more sensual and enchanting, Laura Esquivel's Like Water for Chocolate is a classic for a reason. Set during the Mexican Revolution, Tita's intense emotions literally infuse her cooking, causing magical, often comical or dramatic effects on those who eat her food. It's a truly delicious, passionate read.
Food and magic, always a good combo.
Isn't it? And of course, we have to mention Toni Morrison's Beloved again. A haunting, poetic, and deeply disturbing exploration of trauma, memory, and the legacy of slavery through the story of Seth, a former slave haunted by the ghost of her baby daughter. While, as we noted, Morrison had complex feelings about the label, it's a powerful example often cited in discussions of the genre and embodies its spirit of grappling with horrific reality through the uncanny. Required reading, really.
An absolutely essential American novel.
Absolutely. And maybe just a couple of bonus recommendations for those looking for more contemporary or perhaps slightly lighter entries that still capture the essence. Consider Helene Wecker's The Golem and the Jinni. It brings mythical beings, a cautious golem made of clay and a fiery jinni made of, well, fire to life in 19th century New York City. It beautifully integrates subtle magical elements and ancient folklore into a realistic historical setting. Or Toshikazu Kawaguchi's Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which has become very popular. It's set in a small, hidden cafe in Tokyo that allows patrons to travel back in time, but only under very strict rules, including returning before their cup of coffee gets cold. It uses a simple, magical premise to explore themes of love, loss, and regret in a very gentle, moving way.
Great suggestions. That gives people a lot to explore.
Hopefully something for everyone interested in dipping their toes in.
What a journey we've taken today. We've truly immersed ourselves in the enchanting, complex world of magical realism. We've moved from its surprising artistic roots in Germany to its powerful literary blossoming in Latin America, and traced its diverse manifestations across the globe in different art forms.
It's covered a lot of ground.
It really has. We've discovered how it seamlessly blends the impossible with the everyday, how it challenges our perceptions of what's real, and how it provides such a unique, profound lens for social and political critique, especially for voices often pushed to the margins. It's a genre that clearly doesn't just entertain, it makes you think differently about the world.
That's its power, I think.
So now it's your turn. If you're listening, pick up one of the books we've mentioned, or seek out another that calls to you. There's so many more out there. Let yourself experience the uncanny reality held within their pages. Allow your imagination to be stretched, not necessarily by inventing new worlds, but perhaps by seeing our own world through a fresh, maybe slightly tilted perspective. So here's a final thought to leave you with. What if the greatest magic isn't actually hidden in worlds beyond our own, but lies dormant in the subtle, unsettling truths hidden within the reality we take for granted every single day? What everyday mysteries, what marvelous realities are you missing just by looking conventionally? Challenge yourself, maybe, to see the extraordinary lurking just beneath the surface of the ordinary. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.